A Russian serviceman in Ukraine can now face danger long before he reaches the actual front line. It may not begin when he fires a weapon, and not even when he steps into a trench. The threat can start at the moment he leaves a forest belt, rides a motorcycle over a dirt track, or takes shelter in an abandoned building while assuming the sky above him is empty. This is the kind of battlefield Ukraine is shaping through drones. Units such as Signum Battalion, Magyar Birds, Nemesis, and K2 are not only targeting infantry close to trench positions. They are monitoring roads, tree lines, light vehicles, supply locations, communications equipment, and temporary assembly zones across several sectors of the front. For Russia, the issue is no longer limited to the loss of one soldier or one truck captured in a drone clip. The deeper problem is movement itself. In daylight, roads become exposed. At night, darkness no longer guarantees concealment when thermal cameras are scanning the ground. And once a target appears, an FPV drone can reach it before it has time to disappear. Before we go deeper, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more clear analysis of the weapons, battles, and geopolitical shocks shaping the war today. So what happens when an army can no longer move without being detected? Ukraine's drone war is no longer centered on a single famous formation or one successful strike. It is beginning to resemble a connected hunting network operating across several fronts, where different drone teams perform the same lethal process from different directions. Signum Battalion, Magyar Birds, Nemesis, and K2 may appear in different videos and reports, but the pattern behind their work is often the same. A reconnaissance UAV observes the ground. A target is identified, an FPV drone or another strike platform is launched. After the impact, another aerial asset checks the result and looks for further movement. That rhythm is important because it turns scattered battlefield footage into something bigger than a collection of dramatic clips. It shows a method based on speed, constant pressure, and persistent observation. The Lyman front offers one of the clearest examples of this approach. Signum Battalion has become closely associated with drone activity in this sector, where forest belts, damaged homes, narrow routes, and small settlements make movement complicated but not invisible. In February, Ukrinform reported that Signum pilots used night FPV drones to interfere with a Russian advance on the Lyman front, striking troops before they could build momentum against Ukrainian positions. The tactical meaning is clear. A Russian soldier does not have to reach a trench before he becomes part of the battle. He can be detected while crossing a forest line, leaving cover, or moving between buildings, and that brief moment of exposure can be enough to bring a strike drone toward him. This is where the battlefield begins to close in around the attacker. Farther south and east, the same logic appears across Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Luhansk, but the list of targets becomes broader. Magyar Birds, Nemesis, and K2 are not only searching for infantry. Their footage and reports show strikes against trucks, ATVs, locomotives, storage sites, logistics hubs, communications equipment, and temporary staging points. Militaria reported that Ukraine's unmanned systems forces struck locomotives, warehouses, and communications centers over several days, while Nemesis pilots hit a drone landing site and UAV warehouse in the Zaporizhzhia region. This matters because every target behind the line of contact supports someone closer to the front. A destroyed vehicle can slow the movement of soldiers. A damaged warehouse can interrupt supplies. A broken communications node can delay orders. A drone does not only harm the object it hits, it can disrupt the wider system that keeps Russian attacks moving. This is why these operations should be understood as a network rather than isolated videos. One unit may monitor a forest road near Lyman, while another strikes a storage point in Luhansk or a communications site in Zaporizhzhia. Each strike produces a local effect, but together they generate a broader field of pressure. Russian commanders have to think not only about Ukrainian artillery or minefields, but also about whether their roads, depots, vehicles, and staging areas are already being watched from above. That creates hesitation, it slows planning, it forces smaller movements, stronger concealment, and greater risk for every supply trip. The deeper lesson is that Ukraine is building a battlefield where detection and attack are linked almost in real time. Drone crews do not need to hold every road with infantry. They need enough eyes in the air, enough pilots ready to launch, and enough Russian targets forced to pass through exposed space. Once that chain works, the front is no longer just a line on a map. It becomes a moving trap, and any Russian unit entering that space may already be part of the next targeting cycle. That is the tactical foundation of the larger problem Russia now faces. Russia is relying more on motorcycles, ATVs, and light trucks, because the older armored assault has become easier to detect and harder to shield. This is not an irrational battlefield choice. It is an emergency adaptation to a war where large vehicles may be spotted long before they reach combat. A tank or armored personnel carrier provides firepower and protection, but it also produces noise, heat, dust, and a clear outline on the screen of a reconnaissance UAV. Once that vehicle is marked, FPV teams can wait for a useful angle, hit the lead machine, block the path, and push the rest of the column into disorder. That is why Moscow is trying to move in a way that is faster, smaller, and less predictable. Motorcycles now serve a very practical role for Russian assault groups. They allow soldiers to cross open gaps quickly, use narrow forest tracks, and avoid the slow pace of armored columns. A rider can separate from others, choose a different line, and try to reach a tree belt before artillery or drone teams fully react. RUSI has noted that motorcycles and ATVs are returning to the battlefield because drones have changed how mechanized forces operate. And one widely repeated estimate says tactical UAVs account for roughly 60 to 70% of damaged and destroyed Russian systems. That number helps explain the pressure driving the shift. Russia is not using light vehicles because they are superior to armor in every situation. It is using them because armor has become too costly to risk in many smaller attacks. ATVs give Russian units another form of flexibility. They can move over rough ground, transport ammunition, support small assault teams, and help soldiers reach places that trucks cannot easily enter. In theory, this helps Russia maintain pressure on Ukrainian positions without creating one large target for Ukrainian drones. Reports have also described Russia expanding motorcycle training and using motorcycles, civilian vehicles, and mixed motorized groups along the front. But this adaptation has a clear limit. A small vehicle may be more difficult to follow than a tank, but the person riding it is far more exposed. There is no thick armor, no turret, and no meaningful protection from fragments once a drone gets close. Light trucks and civilian-style vehicles create a different compromise. They can carry more troops or supplies than a motorcycle, and they may blend more easily into damaged roads or built-up areas. But if one is discovered at the wrong moment, it becomes a concentrated target. A truck filled with soldiers can turn a single FPV hit into a serious loss, especially when passengers have little time to dismount or scatter. This is the brutal calculation behind light mobility. It may lower the chance of being detected early, but it can also increase casualties once detection happens anyway. Speed helps only until the sky identifies the route. The deeper issue for Russia is that smaller vehicles do not remove the drone threat. They simply change the form of the risk. Motorcycles can rush through a gap, ATVs can slip across broken terrain, and trucks can move along secondary roads. But all of them still depend on timing, concealment, and luck. If Ukrainian reconnaissance catches that movement, the advantage can disappear within seconds. Moscow is trying to survive the drone age by becoming lighter and faster, yet that same choice is placing more soldiers in the open with less protection. And once those troops are exposed, the next stage of the fight depends on how quickly Ukraine can turn a sighting into a strike. Ukraine's strike chain is so dangerous because it connects the eye in the sky with the weapon in the air almost immediately. A Russian unit may believe that speed is the solution, but speed only matters if the movement remains unseen. Once a reconnaissance UAV spots a small group crossing a field, entering a tree line, or stopping near a building, the clock starts. The drone crew does not need to guess where the soldiers might be hours later. It can follow the movement as it happens, pass the image to a strike team, and keep the target under observation until an FPV drone is ready to move. That is why even a short trip near the front can become a race between concealment and response. The basic structure is simple, but the effect is severe. A reconnaissance UAV often remains higher and farther back, watching roads, forest edges, ruined buildings, and suspected assembly areas. When it detects movement, that information flows to operators who choose the best available attack option. A strike drone then flies lower, using terrain and timing to close the distance. After the hit, the watching UAV does not leave the area. It checks the result, searches for survivors, and looks for another vehicle or team trying to escape. This creates a cycle in which one sighting can produce one strike, and one strike can reveal the next target. In this type of fight, the first mistake can begin a chain reaction. Fiber-optic FPV drones are making this cycle harder to disrupt. Traditional FPV drones rely on radio signals, and both sides have spent years trying to jam those links with electronic warfare. Fiber-optic drones work differently. They pull a thin cable behind them, and that cable keeps the control signal and video feed connected to the operator. These systems can use fiber-optic lines reaching roughly 10 to 20 kilometers, allowing the drone to maintain a stable image without relying on standard radio control. For a pilot, this means the picture can remain clear until the final seconds before impact. This does not mean fiber-optic drones solve every problem for Ukraine. The cable adds weight, restricts some maneuvers, and can be damaged by terrain, trees, or obstacles. These drones also require careful operation because the line has to unwind as the aircraft flies. But their battlefield value is still obvious. In sectors where electronic warfare is intense, a normal FPV may lose signal before reaching the target. A fiber-optic model can continue forward even when jamming fills the air. That changes the level of danger for Russian troops who once relied on EW cover, forest routes, or broken urban terrain to reduce the drone threat. The larger point is that Ukraine is not only improving the drone itself, it is improving the link between detection, decision, and attack. Reconnaissance UAVs provide the eyes. FPV crews deliver the strike. Fiber-optic control helps preserve the connection when electronic warfare attempts to cut it. Together, these elements create a faster and more reliable kill chain. For Russian soldiers, being seen is no longer just a warning. It can be the first step in a very short sequence that ends with a drone already closing in. And when that sequence becomes harder to interrupt, Ukraine can use drones not only to strike moving troops, but also to damage the systems supporting them. That support network has now become one of Ukraine's key target sets. The battle is no longer only about hitting Russian soldiers as they move toward the front. Ukrainian drone units are also trying to weaken the parts of the Russian war machine positioned behind those soldiers. Ammunition stores, logistics hubs, UAV depots, landing sites, communications antennas, and temporary staging areas all matter because they help Russia prepare attacks. If these locations are hit before an assault begins, troops at the front may arrive with less support, fewer drones, weaker coordination, and a slower supply flow. That is where a small strike can generate a much larger battlefield effect. The K2 strike against a Russian logistics hub in the Luhansk region shows why these targets matter. A logistics site is not simply a building or a pile of equipment. It is a place where fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and military gear can be collected before being moved closer to the front. If a drone destroys that hub, the consequences can spread beyond the blast area. A unit waiting for shells may receive fewer rounds. A vehicle crew may lose repair material. Infantry may have to delay movement because supplies are no longer ready. In a war defined by pressure, delay can become a form of loss. Nemesis has also shown how Ukrainian drone teams are pushing deeper into Russia's support structure. In Zaporizhzhia, reported strikes on a UAV depot and a landing site delivered a clear tactical message. Ukraine is not only defending against Russian drones in the air, it is trying to hit the places where those systems are stored, prepared, and launched. When a UAV warehouse is damaged, Russia may lose aircraft parts, batteries, or control equipment. When a landing site is destroyed, operators may be forced to relocate, rebuild procedures, and accept more risk. That weakens Russia's ability to respond to Ukrainian strikes with its own aerial pressure. Communications targets are just as important as ammunition or drones. Nemesis attacks on antennas and communications centers in Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia point to a deeper objective: disrupting the command link between Russian units. On the battlefield, orders must move quickly. Artillery crews need updated targets, assault groups need direction, drone teams need contact with observers. If a communications node is damaged, the front does not always collapse, but it can become slower and less organized. A few minutes of confusion can matter when troops are already moving under surveillance. This is how a strike on a metal antenna can affect soldiers inside trenches kilometers away. Magyar Birds adds another layer by targeting transport and movement behind the fighting line. Reported strikes on locomotives and transport-related targets matter because rail and road links keep heavy equipment and supplies moving toward active sectors. A locomotive does not need to be near a trench to influence the battle. It may be part of the chain that brings ammunition, vehicles, fuel, or engineering material forward. When that chain is interrupted, Russia has to find another route, wait for repairs, or shift cargo to less efficient transport. That creates friction, and modern war punishes any force that moves too slowly. This is the real meaning of Ukraine's wider drone campaign. It is not merely hunting whatever appears at the front. It is cutting into the system that allows Russia to fight, move, communicate, and rebuild pressure after each failed attack. Soldiers may be the most visible targets, but warehouses, antennas, UAV depots, and staging areas decide whether those soldiers can keep advancing. If the front line is where Russian forces try to push forward, logistics and communications determine how long that push can continue. Ukraine is now hitting both, and that makes Moscow's next problem harder to hide. Open ground is no longer the only dangerous place for Russian troops. The harder lesson from these drone battles is that even cover is becoming less reliable. A soldier may expose himself clearly while running across a field, but he may also crawl into bushes, hide inside a damaged house, or move along a tree line and still be found. That changes an old battlefield instinct. In earlier wars, a man under branches or behind a wall had a better chance of vanishing from enemy view. In Ukraine, that cover may only be temporary, because the sky can keep watching long after the soldier believes he has disappeared. This is where fear begins to follow every movement. The problem becomes worse in broken terrain. Forest belts, village edges, destroyed homes, and narrow tracks can help soldiers avoid direct fire from the ground. But they also create predictable routes. If Russian troops want to move without armor, they often have to use the same lines of trees, the same gaps between buildings, or the same dirt roads leading toward the front. Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs can study those routes and wait for movement. A man lying still in a bush may look concealed to another soldier, but from above, a single wrong movement can reveal his location. A person leaving a building at the wrong second can turn shelter into a trap. That is why the search from above can be more patient than the person hiding below. In daylight, this pressure is easy to understand. Roads, fields, rooftops, tree shadows, and fresh tracks all provide clues for drone teams. A small group crossing open land can be noticed from a long distance. A motorcycle throwing up dust can reveal the route it has taken. A truck stopping near a structure can suggest that troops or supplies are inside. This does not mean every movement is detected, but it does mean the margin for error is much smaller. Soldiers must think about distance, timing, route, noise, and exposure all at once. The battlefield no longer punishes only the slow unit, it punishes the visible one. Night no longer solves the problem. Darkness once gave infantry a chance to cross dangerous ground, move supplies, or reach a new position while the enemy had reduced visibility. Thermal cameras have changed that calculation. A human body emits heat, and on a cold screen that heat can appear as a clear moving shape. A soldier may believe he has disappeared into blackness, but the drone operator may see a bright mark moving through the dark. Even dawn and dusk are not safe windows if the area is already under observation. This is the harsh part of the new rhythm. The front no longer fully sleeps. Ukraine's advantage in this model is speed joined with constant attention. A sighting can turn into a decision can turn into a launch can turn into an impact before the target reaches better cover. After that, the same aerial view can continue scanning for survivors, medics, vehicles, or a second group trying to reach the same area. This does not require Ukraine to control every meter with infantry. It requires enough eyes, enough crews, and enough strike drones to make Russian movement feel unsafe across both time and terrain. In such a war, control does not come only from tanks, artillery, or trenches. It comes from seeing first, striking first, and giving the enemy almost no time to vanish. That reality leads directly to the final question of this battle. The drone war in Ukraine is becoming a test of who can control movement faster. What is happening around Lyman, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Luhansk is not just a collection of strike videos. It shows a broader shift in modern combat, where the side that sees first can often shape the fight before the enemy reaches the main defensive line. For Russia, the danger is no longer limited to losing one motorcycle, one ATV, one truck, or one storage point. The larger problem is that every step forward now carries a higher cost. Troops must move under observation. Supply routes must survive drone patrols. Communication sites must remain active while being hunted. Even small delays can weaken an attack before it becomes serious. Moscow will not remain passive. Russian forces will keep adapting tactics, spreading units out, improving camouflage, adding electronic warfare, and using more light vehicles to avoid large losses. But Ukraine is also adapting through rapid reconnaissance, FPV teams, fiber-optic drones, thermal cameras, and a growing habit of attacking the support network behind the assault. That is why the next phase of this fight may not be decided by one village or one dramatic strike. It may be decided by which side can connect drones, data, pilots, logistics, and battlefield decisions into the fastest chain. In this kind of war, a few seconds of exposure can decide whether a unit survives or disappears. For more clear analysis of the weapons, battles, and geopolitical shocks shaping today's war, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.